Sometimes the greatest miracles arrive wearing wet shoes instead of golden crowns. The storm had already swallowed the mountains long before midnight, and every clap of thunder rolled across the Montana Valley like a warning that nobody should have been outside. Rain pounded against the weathered log cabin, where Nathan Brooks carefully placed another piece of firewood into the stone fireplace before glancing toward the window. His 8-year-old daughter Emma had fallen asleep on the old couch beneath a patchwork quilt, still holding the storybook they had been reading together only minutes earlier. Their home was small, warm, and built almost entirely by Nathan's own hands after years of patient work. Every beam carried the mark of honest labor. Every chair had been carved inside the workshop, standing only a few yards from the cabin. Life had never been easy for Nathan since losing his wife years before, but hardship had quietly become another piece of the landscape rather than an enemy. He never complained. He simply kept building, kept working, and kept showing Emma that dignity could survive even the hardest seasons. Outside, the wind howled through towering pine trees with enough force to shake the porch railing. Nathan reached toward the window again when something unexpected caught his attention. A pair of headlights slowly appeared through the sheets of rain before stopping near the gravel driveway. No visitor ever came this far into the mountains during a storm like this. He slipped on his old work boots, pulled his faded flannel jacket over his shoulders, and stepped onto the porch. The cold rain immediately soaked his sleeves as lightning briefly illuminated a luxury black sport utility vehicle resting beneath the swaying trees. The driver's door opened. A woman stepped into the storm, struggling against the fierce wind while clutching a weathered leather envelope and an antique brass key wrapped tightly inside her hand. Even beneath the rain, Nathan could tell she was accustomed to a completely different world. Her tailored navy coat, elegant posture, and composed expression spoke of boardrooms instead of mountain roads, yet exhaustion had replaced confidence in her eyes. She climbed the wooden steps without hesitation before stopping only a few feet away. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. The rain filled the silence between strangers whose lives should never have crossed. Finally, the woman looked directly at Nathan. "Are you Nathan Brooks?" she asked quietly. "I am," he answered. Then I found the right door. She carefully held out the soaked envelope instead of introducing herself. Nathan accepted it without taking his eyes off her face. The paper had become soft from the rain, but the words written across the front remained perfectly clear. To be opened only by Nathan Brooks before sunrise. He slowly unfolded the letter while the storm continued to roar around them. Inside was only a single handwritten sentence. "Find Nathan Brooks before sunrise, or the Hayes family legacy will be lost forever." Nathan read the sentence twice before lifting his eyes toward the woman once more. "Who are you?" he asked. She finally took a slow breath that seemed to carry the weight of countless sleepless nights. "My name is Victoria Hayes," she said. "I am the chief executive officer of Hayes Industries, and my grandfather left instructions that led me here. I do not understand why your name was in his final letter, but he made one thing perfectly clear. If I did not find you before sunrise, everything he spent his life protecting would disappear." Nathan looked from the letter to the antique brass key still resting in her hand. Nothing about the moment made sense. He had never heard of William Hayes personally. He had never visited the headquarters of Hayes Industries. He had spent his life building cabinets, repairing porches, helping neighbors after snowstorms, and raising his daughter far away from corporate towers and billionaire families. Yet something inside the woman's voice carried a sincerity that could not be rehearsed. Emma quietly appeared behind her father, rubbing sleep from her eyes as she peeked through the open doorway. She looked curiously at the stranger standing in the rain before whispering, "Dad, are we helping someone tonight?" Nathan glanced toward his daughter and then back toward Victoria. Without another question, he stepped aside and opened the cabin door wider. "You should come inside before the storm gets worse," he said calmly. Victoria hesitated for only a moment before crossing the threshold, carrying the mysterious key, the impossible letter, and the first pieces of a story that neither of them yet realized had begun many years before. Nathan gently closed the cabin door behind Victoria, and the roar of the storm immediately softened into a distant rhythm against the log walls. The warmth from the stone fireplace slowly chased away the cold that clung to her rain-soaked coat. Emma quietly disappeared into her bedroom before returning with a thick wool blanket, offering it without hesitation. Victoria accepted it with a grateful smile that seemed unfamiliar to someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms instead of receiving simple acts of kindness. Nathan placed a steaming mug of coffee on the wooden table while carefully spreading the weathered letter beside the antique brass key. Neither object looked valuable to anyone unfamiliar with their story, yet both carried a strange weight that filled the room with unanswered questions. Victoria slowly removed a second folded document from inside her leather portfolio. It was a copy of her grandfather William Hayes's final written instructions. She carefully unfolded the pages and looked toward Nathan. "My grandfather passed away 3 days ago," she said quietly. His attorneys expected the will to divide the company, but instead they found this private letter addressed only to me. It ordered me to leave immediately, drive to these mountains, and find you before sunrise. He warned that if I failed, everything our family spent generations protecting would eventually disappear. Nathan listened without interrupting. He had learned years ago that people often revealed the truth when someone simply allowed silence to exist. Victoria continued. There was one more instruction. She gently touched the old brass key resting on the table. "We must travel to an abandoned place called Black Creek Station before sunrise. The key belongs there." He wrote that the answers neither of us are looking for have been waiting inside that station for decades. Nathan frowned thoughtfully. The name sounded strangely familiar, although he could not immediately understand why. He had driven countless back roads across western Montana repairing fences, restoring cabins, and helping neighbors after storms. Yet Black Creek Station remained buried somewhere deep inside his memory. Emma quietly climbed onto the chair beside the fireplace, studying the worn brass key with innocent curiosity. She tilted her head before speaking in a soft voice. "Grandpa used to say old keys unlock stories before they unlock doors." The room became completely still. Nathan slowly turned toward his daughter. Those exact words had belonged to his late father. He had not heard them spoken aloud since the day they buried him many years earlier. Nathan stared at the key as memories began quietly returning. He remembered standing beside his father as a young boy near abandoned railroad tracks somewhere high in the mountains. He remembered hearing distant trains echo through the valley while his father smiled and repeated the same mysterious sentence. At the time, Nathan believed it was only another one of his father's old sayings. Now, for the first time, it felt less like wisdom and more like a forgotten clue. Victoria noticed the change in his expression. "You have heard those words before," she whispered. Nathan nodded slowly without taking his eyes from the key. "My father used to say them whenever we passed an old railway station." I never asked him what he meant. Outside, the storm gradually weakened as the first faint hints of dawn prepared to rise beyond the mountains. Nathan looked toward the clock hanging above the fireplace. Sunrise was approaching far more quickly than either of them realized. He carefully folded William's letter, slipped the brass key into his jacket pocket, and quietly stood. "If your grandfather believed the answers are waiting at Black Creek Station," he said calmly, "then there is no reason to waste another minute wondering." Victoria rose without hesitation. Emma smiled sleepily as Nathan gathered his truck keys from the kitchen counter. Within moments, the cabin. Lights were turned off, the fire safely secured, and the three of them stepped into the cool mountain air where the fading storm had left the forest washed clean beneath the first pale light of approaching morning. None of them realized that someone else had already reached Black Creek Station before they ever began the journey. The narrow mountain road wound through towering pine forests as the first pale light of dawn slowly spread across the eastern horizon. Nathan Brooks guided his aging pickup truck with steady hands while Victoria Hayes followed closely behind in her sport utility vehicle, the antique brass key resting safely inside Nathan's jacket pocket. Emma sat quietly beside her father, watching the mist drift between the trees as though the mountains themselves were guarding an old secret. Neither Nathan nor Victoria spoke very much during the drive. There were moments when silence revealed more than conversation ever could. Victoria occasionally glanced at the weathered pickup ahead of her and found herself wondering how a man who owned so little could carry himself with such quiet confidence. Nathan, on the other hand, remained focused on the road. He had stopped trying to solve mysteries before they unfolded. Years of raising Emma alone had taught him that patience often uncovered answers faster than fear ever could. Nearly an hour later, the trees opened to reveal the abandoned Black Creek station. Time had almost erased the little railway stop from memory. Broken wooden platforms leaned beneath decades of snow and rain. Rusted railroad tracks disappeared into fields of tall grass. Faded signs still clung to cracked walls where travelers had once gathered before continuing west across Montana. The station looked forgotten by the modern world, yet something about it felt strangely alive. Nathan parked near the entrance and stepped onto the gravel. The cool morning air carried the scent of wet pine and old timber. Victoria joined him while Emma carefully looked around with wide, curious eyes. Nathan studied the station for several long seconds before quietly saying, "I've been here before." Victoria turned toward him in surprise. When Nathan slowly shook his head. "I was very young. My father brought me here once. I only remember pieces of that day." They entered through the weathered front doors, their footsteps echoing softly across worn wooden floors. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight, breaking through broken windows high above. Every room seemed frozen in another era. Old ticket counters remained untouched. Faded train schedules still hung crooked on cracked walls. Emma wandered slowly beside her father before pointing toward an old freight office at the far end of the station. "Dad, look!" Behind a row of abandoned filing cabinets stood a heavy steel door almost hidden beneath years of dust. Nathan carefully brushed away the dirt until a familiar brass keyhole appeared in the center. Without speaking, he removed the antique key from his pocket. It slid smoothly into the lock as though it had been waiting there all along. One slow turn echoed through the empty station before the heavy door quietly opened. Stone steps disappeared into darkness beneath the building. Nathan switched on an old flashlight he kept inside his truck while Victoria picked up an abandoned railroad lantern resting near the entrance. Together, they descended into a forgotten underground chamber where a massive antique safe stood against the far wall. Victoria's breathing slowed with anticipation. William Hayes had written that everything began here. Nathan approached the safe, expecting to discover an untouched secret locked away for decades. Instead, he stopped several feet away. The thick steel door already stood slightly open. Fresh, muddy footprints crossed the stone floor, their edges still sharply defined. Someone had entered the chamber only hours earlier. Nathan slowly pulled the safe completely open. It was almost empty except for a single folded piece of paper carefully placed in the center shelf. Victoria unfolded it with trembling hands. Written across the page in neat black ink were only 5 words. "You are finally on time." The message carried no signature, no explanation, and no date. Yet both Nathan and Victoria immediately understood one unsettling truth. Whatever William Hayes had prepared inside Black Creek Station, someone else had arrived first, but instead of taking everything away, they had deliberately left the next chapter waiting for them. Victoria carefully folded the mysterious note and slipped it into her coat pocket while Nathan continued examining the nearly empty safe. At first glance, it appeared that everything important had already been removed, but years of working with handcrafted furniture had trained Nathan to notice details other people often overlooked. He slowly ran his fingertips along the worn wooden shelf inside the heavy steel compartment before pausing. One section sounded different beneath his gentle tap. He pressed firmly against the back panel, and a hidden compartment quietly released with a soft click. Emma smiled as the narrow wooden panel slowly opened. Inside rested 4 carefully preserved items that seemed untouched by time. There was a thick leather journal with William Hayes embossed in faded gold lettering across the cover, a rolled parchment secured by a blue ribbon, a small digital flash drive sealed inside a waterproof case, and an antique railroad lantern polished so carefully that it almost seemed new despite its age. Victoria looked at the collection in complete silence. "This is what my grandfather wanted us to find," she whispered. Nathan lifted the leather journal with both hands. It felt surprisingly heavy, not because of its weight alone, but because of the years it appeared to carry within its pages. Victoria gently untied the blue ribbon around the parchment. The document revealed elegant handwriting beside an official company seal that had darkened with age. Although neither of them read beyond the opening lines, it was immediately obvious that the paper was far older than Hayes Industries itself. Emma reached toward the railroad lantern with careful curiosity. "It is beautiful," she said softly. Nathan nodded. Someone spent years making sure these things survived. As Victoria carefully placed the journal and parchment onto an old wooden table nearby, Nathan picked up the lantern to inspect it more closely. Unlike ordinary railroad lanterns, its base seemed unusually thick. He turned it over and noticed several tiny brass screws hidden beneath the metal frame. Using the small screwdriver attached to his pocket knife, he carefully loosened them one by one. The metal base separated just enough to reveal another folded letter hidden inside a narrow compartment. Victoria looked at Nathan with quiet amazement. "Another message?" she asked. Nathan unfolded the brittle paper with extraordinary care. The handwriting matched the note found inside the safe, but this message contained only 3 simple words. "Trust before certainty." The sentence lingered in the quiet underground chamber far longer than anyone expected. Victoria slowly repeated the words to herself. Throughout her career, she had built billion-dollar decisions on research, contracts, and measurable facts. Trust had always come after certainty. William Hayes had deliberately reversed that order. Nathan quietly smiled, although not because he understood the message completely. "My father used to say something similar," he admitted. He believed that character is revealed long before proof arrives. Emma looked between the adults before asking, "Do you think Grandpa William wanted both of you to learn the same lesson?" Neither Nathan nor Victoria answered immediately. Instead, they opened the leather journal together. The first page contained no financial records, no corporate strategies, and no family history. Instead, there was a single handwritten sentence dated almost 15 years earlier. "Today I met a man who does not know that anyone is watching him, and I believe he may become the guardian of everything I've spent my life trying to protect." Victoria slowly lifted her eyes toward Nathan. He remained completely still, genuinely confused by what he had just read. He searched his memory again and again, but could not remember ever meeting William Hayes. Yet someone had clearly been observing his life long before this extraordinary morning. As the 3 of them quietly absorbed the meaning of those unexpected words, the small waterproof flash drive resting on the table suddenly seemed far more important than any fortune hidden inside the abandoned station, because whatever William Hayes had chosen to record all those years ago was no longer about money. It was about the measure of a man who had never realized his ordinary acts of kindness had become someone else's greatest reason to hope. The underground chamber remained perfectly still as Nathan Brooks turned the first page of William Hayes's journal with the same care he reserved for restoring antique furniture. The leather binding creaked softly, releasing the faint scent of aged paper that had been protected for years beneath Black Creek Station. Victoria Hayes stood beside him, unable to take her eyes off the handwritten entries. She had expected financial secrets, hidden ownership records, or evidence explaining the future of Hayes Industries. Instead, she found something far more unexpected. Every page described ordinary moments involving one man living an ordinary life. The earliest entry had been written nearly 15 years earlier. William described watching a young carpenter stop his truck beside a snow-covered highway to help an elderly couple whose tire had gone flat. The journal carefully noted that Nathan refused payment, wished them a safe trip, and quietly drove away before they even learned his full name. Another entry recorded how Nathan repaired the porch of a retired schoolteacher after a windstorm because she could not afford the repairs. William wrote that Nathan accepted nothing more than homemade cookies and a handshake. Page after page revealed similar stories. There were no grand heroic acts. There were no cameras, newspaper articles, or public recognition. There was only one quiet decision after another to place kindness ahead of convenience. Emma listened carefully as Victoria softly read several passages aloud. The little girl smiled because every story sounded exactly like the father she already knew. Nathan lowered his eyes, visibly uncomfortable hearing years of private moments described by someone he had never realized was nearby. "I never did those things expecting anyone to remember," he said quietly. Victoria looked at him with growing respect. "That is exactly why my grandfather remembered every one of them." Nathan slowly turned another page. The handwriting became slightly slower as William reflected on the values that had built both his family and his company. He wrote that money could purchase intelligence, experience, and influence, but none of those qualities guaranteed character. Character could only be discovered when a person believed no one was watching. William admitted that he had quietly observed many talented people over the years, including executives, investors, attorneys, and advisors. Some impressed him with remarkable ability. Very few impressed him with consistent kindness. Then one sentence caused all three readers to pause. "The company will only survive if someone protects its soul before protecting its success." Nathan read the words twice before quietly closing the journal for a moment. He looked around the forgotten chamber where decades of silence seemed to surround William's final lesson. "He was never searching for the richest person," Nathan said softly. "He was searching for the right person." Victoria nodded slowly, realizing that her grandfather had spent years measuring people with standards completely different from those used inside corporate boardrooms. Her attention shifted toward the waterproof case resting beside the journal. She carefully opened it and removed the small flash drive. Attached to it was another handwritten label in William's unmistakable handwriting. "Play only after the journal has been read." Nathan found an aging laptop stored inside a weatherproof cabinet hidden beneath the old table, its battery preserved by an external power pack that still held enough charge to operate. Someone had prepared everything with remarkable care. Victoria inserted the flash drive while Emma quietly climbed onto a nearby wooden crate. The screen flickered to life before displaying a simple video recorded inside William Hayes's private office years earlier. The elderly businessman smiled gently into the camera, his eyes carrying the calm confidence of someone who understood that time was limited but purpose could outlive every generation. Before saying anything else, he looked directly into the camera and quietly spoke words that immediately filled the underground chamber with unexpected emotion. "If you are watching this," William said, "then Nathan Brooks has reached this place, which means the guardian of everything that truly matters is finally closer than either of you ever imagined." William Hayes remained silent for several seconds on the screen, allowing the weight of his opening words to settle naturally inside the underground chamber. His expression carried neither urgency nor fear. Instead, it reflected the quiet confidence of a man who had spent an entire lifetime preparing for a moment he knew he would never personally witness. "Victoria," he continued gently, "if you are standing beside Nathan Brooks, then you have already passed the first test. You chose to trust before certainty. That choice matters more than you realize." Victoria lowered her eyes as she remembered the long drive through the storm, wondering how different everything might have become if she had dismissed the strange instructions inside her grandfather's letter. William smiled faintly before continuing. "Nathan, there is a very good chance that you do not remember me. That is exactly as I intended." Nathan leaned forward slightly, searching the familiar yet unfamiliar face on the screen. "Nearly 15 years ago, my car became stranded on a mountain road after a heavy spring storm. There were no cameras. There were no reporters. I was simply an old traveler with a broken vehicle. You stopped your truck without knowing my name. You repaired the damage with tools you carried for your own work, refused every dollar I offered, and apologized because the repair was only temporary. Before driving away, you looked at me and said something I have never forgotten. You said that helping people should never come with a receipt. Nathan closed his eyes for a brief moment as the memory finally returned. He remembered the older gentleman who insisted on paying for the repair. He remembered politely refusing before continuing toward another construction job. He had never imagined that simple encounter would echo across 15 years. William continued speaking with quiet warmth. From that day forward, I became curious about the man who believed kindness required no audience. I never interfered with your life. I never offered hidden gifts or opportunities. I simply observed from a respectful distance whenever our paths crossed through community projects, local charities, or mutual friends. Every year, I hoped to discover that your generosity had been a single fortunate moment. Every year, you proved me wrong. Emma reached for her father's hand as William's voice filled the chamber once again. Success without character eventually destroys itself. Character without recognition quietly transforms everyone nearby. That is why I asked trusted friends to watch over both my company and the communities it serves. Again and again, they returned with the same conclusion. Nathan Brooks remained the same man, whether anyone noticed him or not. William paused before looking directly into the camera with renewed seriousness. Inside this chamber, you also discovered an original charter. That document represents the values upon which Hayes Industries was founded long before it became a global company. It was never meant to remain hidden forever. The time has finally come for those principles to return. Victoria carefully unrolled the parchment once more while William continued. Do not reveal the charter privately. Do not negotiate behind closed doors. Bring Nathan with you to the full meeting of the board of directors. Every director must hear this message together. There is one man already waiting who understands why this journey began. His name is Samuel Whitmore. Trust him completely. He has protected this secret faithfully for many years. Almost as though the timing had been planned to the very second, Victoria's cellular phone vibrated inside her coat pocket. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number. She answered cautiously, and an older, calm voice spoke only 4 words before ending the call. Bring Nathan. We are ready. Victoria slowly lowered the phone, her eyes meeting Nathan's across the quiet chamber. Neither of them spoke immediately because they already understood the journey through the storm had never been the destination. It had only been the invitation. The true test was waiting inside the headquarters of Hayes Industries, where hidden principles would soon stand before power, reputation, and ambition in the full light of day. By late afternoon, the skyline of Seattle rose beyond the windshield as Nathan Brooks guided his pickup truck through streets far busier than any he had driven in years. Victoria Hayes led the way toward the headquarters of Hayes Industries, a gleaming glass tower reflecting the fading sunlight across the city. Nathan felt completely out of place among expensive cars, polished buildings, and people dressed in tailored business suits. Yet he carried himself with the same quiet confidence that had always followed him from his small Montana workshop to every place honest work had taken him. Emma walked beside her father as they entered the spacious lobby, her eyes widening at the soaring ceilings and elegant architecture. Employees greeted Victoria respectfully, but many paused with curious expressions as they noticed the carpenter in worn boots, carrying an old leather journal beneath one arm. Some quietly wondered why the chief executive officer had arrived with a stranger instead of senior executives. Victoria ignored every questioning glance. She had already learned that appearances rarely revealed the truth. An executive assistant escorted them directly to the top floor where the board of directors had already assembled. Long windows overlooked the city while a polished walnut table stretched across the center of the room. Several directors exchanged uncertain looks as Nathan and Emma quietly entered behind Victoria. Before anyone could ask a question, the doors opened once more. An elderly gentleman with neatly combed silver hair stepped inside, carrying a slim leather briefcase. His posture was calm, and his eyes reflected decades of quiet wisdom rather than authority alone. Victoria immediately recognized him. "Samuel Whitmore," she said with genuine surprise. "You retired nearly 5 years ago." Samuel smiled warmly. "Officially, yes. Privately, William Hayes asked me to remain available for one final responsibility." Every conversation inside the room faded into silence. Samuel placed his briefcase upon the conference table before turning toward Nathan. "Mr. Brooks, it is an honor to finally meet you properly." Nathan extended his hand without hesitation. "I wish I understood why everyone seems to know me except me." Samuel chuckled softly. "That is because William insisted your life should never be influenced by our observations. He wanted every act of kindness to remain completely your own." He carefully opened the briefcase and removed a sealed envelope bearing William Hayes' signature across the front. "I have protected this letter for more than a decade. William instructed me to open it only after Victoria and Nathan stood together before the full board of directors." One director leaned forward impatiently. "With respect, we have corporate matters requiring immediate attention." Samuel looked toward him with remarkable calm. "This is the most important corporate matter Hayes Industries has faced in generations." The room became quiet once again. Samuel broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter. "If you are hearing these words," he began, "then my granddaughter has honored my final request. Nathan Brooks has accepted an invitation he never expected, and the board is finally prepared to remember why this company was created." Victoria placed the original charter beside Samuel, while Nathan carefully set William's journal next to it. Together, they formed a simple collection of objects that looked ordinary beside the polished conference table, yet each carried a story stronger than any financial report. Samuel reached for the laptop containing William's recorded message and connected it to the large display at the front of the room. Every light reflection disappeared as the screen slowly came to life. Directors who had spent entire careers discussing profits, acquisitions, and quarterly performance now watched in complete silence, unaware that the next few minutes would challenge everything they believed defined true leadership. Nathan quietly rested one reassuring hand on Emma's shoulder, while William Hayes appeared once more upon the screen, prepared to reveal the purpose that had guided every hidden step of this extraordinary journey. William Hayes looked directly into the camera with the calm expression of a man who understood that truth required no raised voice to make itself heard. Every member of the board of directors remained silent as his image filled the conference room. "For many years," William began, "this company has measured success by numbers that appear in quarterly reports. Those numbers matter, but they are not the reason Hayes Industries exists. A company loses its future the moment it forgets the character that built its foundation." He slowly reached toward a document resting on his desk in the recording. It was identical to the original charter lying before Samuel Whitmore. This charter has never been about ownership alone. It is a promise. Every generation must choose whether to protect profit first or people first. The wrong decision may create temporary wealth, but it will eventually empty the soul of the company. William paused before offering a gentle smile. "Many of you may be wondering why Nathan Brooks is standing among you today. The answer has nothing to do with business experience, investments, or family connections. Nathan has never worked for Hayes Industries. He never asked me for anything. He never even knew who I was." Several directors exchanged uncertain glances, but no one interrupted. William continued. 15 years ago, a carpenter stopped beside an unfamiliar traveler whose vehicle had broken down after a spring storm. He repaired the damage with his own tools, refused payment, apologized because he wished he could have done more, and drove away believing the moment was already forgotten. That traveler was me. Nathan quietly lowered his eyes while Emma gently squeezed his hand. William's voice became even softer. "I spent the following years searching for evidence that his kindness had been accidental. Instead, I found a life filled with the same quiet decisions repeated over and over again. He repaired homes for widows who could not afford help. He volunteered after wildfires without asking for recognition. He mentored young apprentices who had nowhere else to learn. He raised his daughter with honesty instead of bitterness after losing the love of his life. Nobody applauded him because he never performed for applause. The room remained perfectly still. Even the city beyond the windows seemed distant. William carefully folded his hands. I did not spend 15 years searching for my successor. Victoria had already earned that responsibility through intelligence, discipline, and compassion. I spent those years searching for something far more fragile. I searched for proof that the principles written inside our original charter still existed somewhere beyond executive offices and shareholder meetings. I found those principles living inside an ordinary man who believed dignity required no audience. Samuel Whitmore slowly unrolled the original charter and turned to its final page. At the bottom, beneath William's signature, was a handwritten amendment dated only weeks before his passing. Samuel read the words aloud. The Chief Executive Officer of Hayes Industries shall maintain an independent council of community stewardship. The first lifetime advisor shall be Nathan Brooks, whose sole responsibility is to remind every future leader that character must remain greater than profit. A quiet murmur moved through the room before disappearing just as quickly. Nathan immediately shook his head. "I'm only a carpenter," he said honestly. Victoria smiled with genuine respect. "That is exactly why my grandfather trusted you." Nathan looked around the conference table before speaking once more. "If I ever accept this responsibility, I will not come here to tell successful people how to make more money. I will only ask one question before every important decision. Will families sleep better because of what we choose today?" No one answered immediately. They simply looked from Nathan to William's image still frozen upon the screen. In that long, unexpected silence, every title, every salary, and every position inside the room seemed far less important than the quiet measure of a single life that had always chosen kindness when nobody was watching. 1 year later, the mountains of western Montana welcomed another gentle spring morning. But this time, there was no storm waiting beyond the trees. Sunlight filtered through the tall pines surrounding Nathan Brooks's cabin while birdsong replaced the sound of thunder that had changed so many lives 12 months earlier. The little home looked almost exactly the same as it always had. The porch Nathan had repaired years before still overlooked the valley. The small woodworking shop remained filled with the scent of fresh pine and cedar. Emma, now 9 years old, carefully planted colorful wildflowers beneath the front window, smiling every time she stepped back to admire the growing garden. Very little about Nathan's daily routine had changed. He still woke before sunrise. He still built furniture with patient hands. He still stopped whenever neighbors needed help repairing a fence, replacing a roof, or carrying heavy supplies after winter storms. The difference was not that he had become wealthier or more famous. The difference was that thousands of families he would never personally meet had quietly benefited from decisions shaped by the simple question he continued asking at every council of community stewardship meeting. Will families sleep better because of what we choose today? Hayes Industries had changed as well. Under Victoria Hayes's leadership, the company expanded apprenticeship programs for young tradespeople, restored vocational schools across rural communities, invested in affordable housing projects, and created emergency repair grants for families facing unexpected hardships. Every major proposal presented to the board now included one additional page titled Community Impact before financial projections were discussed. At first, some executives viewed the change as symbolic. Over time, they discovered that trust created stronger companies than fear ever could. Samuel Whitmore often smiled quietly during those meetings because he recognized William Hayes's original vision finally returning home. On that peaceful morning, a familiar black sport utility vehicle slowly rolled into Nathan's driveway. Victoria stepped out carrying a small wooden box wrapped with a simple blue ribbon. She was dressed far more casually than she had been during their first meeting, and the confidence in her expression had softened into genuine friendship. Emma ran across the yard to greet her while Nathan emerged from the workshop, wiping sawdust from his hands. Victoria handed him the wooden box without saying a word. Nathan carefully untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside rested an antique silver pocket watch that had been polished until it reflected the morning sunlight. Beneath it lay one final handwritten letter from William Hayes. Nathan unfolded the paper and quietly read the short message aloud. Dear Nathan, if this letter has reached your hands, then you have already proven that my greatest investment was never made inside a boardroom. Money builds companies. Character builds generations. Please keep this watch, not to remember me, but to remember that every ordinary hour offers another opportunity to choose kindness before convenience. That choice will always become someone's unexpected miracle. Nathan gently closed the watch and looked across the valley where Emma laughed beside Victoria while spring flowers danced in the mountain breeze. He slipped the pocket watch into his jacket without another word because some gifts carried more meaning in silence than celebration. The cabin remained humble. The workshop remained busy. The mountains remained unchanged. Yet one quiet decision made beside a lonely road many years earlier had traveled farther than Nathan could ever have imagined. It had crossed generations, transformed a great company, restored forgotten values, and reminded everyone who heard the story that the richest inheritance is never measured by the fortune a person leaves behind, but by the goodness that continues growing in the hearts of others long after that person is gone. Quiet dignity had become a living legacy, and that legacy would continue one ordinary act of kindness at a time.